At some point in the life of your company, you may want the opportunity to hire others to duplicate your efforts, increase productivity, and profits. Bottom line, at some point in your business life, you will need to hire help. I'm Mark Sinix and have been a corporate accountant for over 20 years. I'm going to cover the process of putting employees to work, setting up a payroll, and meeting the major compliance issues. But this is not a complete discussion, which is one you should have with an HR professional if you believe there are specific issues or to check the requirements in your state or municipality. For many, hiring has been as difficult a task as firing. Horror stories of taxes and regulation abound, but setting up and running a payroll needn't be all that difficult. There are a few basic considerations of compliance which must be rigorously maintained. However, beyond that, the costs in time and effort need not be a major expense. Now, this is, however, when you have limited benefits and are not documenting special hires like under government or other organizational programs. Also, there comes a time when you need to deal with a difficult employee. For these situations, you need to consider hiring professional HR assistants. The first thing to consider in hiring is preparing the environment for employees. So let's take a look at our next slide. So first you need to set up a work environment, and for many that means the water cooler and the break room, but there are certain issues that are more important that we need to take a look at. First of all is your bulletin board. Although it seems like a minor issue, there are heavy fines for those that don't hang proper compliance posters from their state Department of Labor and the federal Department of Labor as to minimum wage, equal employment opportunities, and such. So you need to check these requirements out. Very easy to do online, and most of the departments, I know the Department of Labor federal does provide these posters free of charge from the internet. Also, I suggest you pull down a template or put together an employee manual to define the policies for conduct of your employees, benefits, the wages and hours to be worked, and holiday slash sick, vacation time, and the grievance procedures. This will eliminate the complaints of employees that sometimes get outside your organization, and will allow you to prove if you enforce these policies fairly among all employees that you have taken care of the employee properly. The part of hiring that I deal mostly with is the tax part. Not really difficult if you consider there's federal, state, and local, and that you need to consider each of the taxes in these jurisdictions. For federal, when you started your company, if you're more than a sole proprietorship, you received a federal EIN number, and that will set you up for your FICA and FUTA. You also need to consider that to pay these taxes now, the government requires you to use the federal employer federal tax payment system, EFTPS, and you need to set that up as well separately. For state, you're going to have unemployment and state withholding of income tax from the employee. The state unemployment is primarily paid by the employer, but there sometimes are employee contributions. When something is withheld from an employee, it needs to be remitted by the employer on set schedules, usually quarterly. However, if the amounts get into higher numbers, it needs to be more often, and you need to pay attention to that. For your locality, especially in Pennsylvania, there are earned income tax, withholding from employees, and local services tax. So check with your jurisdiction to see what you need to hold from your employee and remit to those jurisdictions. Also, I suggest setting up a separate payroll account so that when you calculate your payroll and taxes, You deposit the whole amount, and then you don't have to worry about when tax time coming up where you're going to get the money. This is an easy way to escrow those payments. Also, before you start interviewing, you need to make sure that you have workers' compensation insurance. This is mandated in almost all states and is required except for officers of a corporation when an exemption is filed. Now, filing these exemptions is different from state to state, but in Pennsylvania, you either need to file it with the Department of Labor or with the workers' compensation insurance company, but it's not an automatic exemption for the owners of the company. Also, you need to consider the application you're going to use. I like to use an application that is also an employment contract, so I make sure there's a space on there that tells the job that the applicant is being considered for and the wage that they are to be paid. Now, this doesn't have to be filled out until you actually hire the person, but make sure that they understand those issues to create a complete employment contract. If you need something more substantial for non-compete or confidentiality reasons, you should consult an HR professional or an attorney. There are several templates online, but if you think you need those agreements, they are sometimes difficult to enforce, so an attorney is a good choice. After the decision is made, you need to get some information from the new hire and complete certain forms. Most importantly, the I-9 for the Department of Homeland Security. On this form, the employee completes the top portion with personal information and verifies that they are currently allowed to work in the United States. The employee completes the verification portion below and generally has the applicant produce proper identification to complete that verification form. This might include a driver's license or a social security card if you're filling out A and B on the form. B and C on the form, or they could use something like a visa or passport and simply complete Part A. Many employers forget to recertify the identifications when they expire, and that is an issue. Here's a quick look at the I-9 form, and as you can see, section 1 is for the employee, and then down below is a place for you to certify the information that the employee has provided, and you need to look at the instructions for List A, List B, and List C, and make sure you put the documentation in the proper column. Also, I keep a copy of whatever documentation they provide with the form. You also need to complete a W-4 when hiring the employee, and that's to let you know the choices for federal tax. There may also be a state form. In my state there's not, but I know that, for example, in Connecticut there is. The employer is not responsible for the number of exemptions claimed on the form, but if it's excessive, the IRS will send you a letter and demand that you withhold for a given number of exemptions. The employee should calculate this themselves. Make sure it's signed and dated. A quick look at the W-4 shows that there are numbers, and you should have the employee fill it out by the numbers so they don't miss any sections. Also, after the decision is made, you need to set up for your payroll, your direct deposit. Issue them a handbook, and I would use a receipt. Complete a new employee report, which is required mostly for getting child support garnishments, and emergency contact cards. You also need to do any benefits paperwork for the benefits that you've set up. Employees can be a big addition to your bottom line, so if you need to hire help, make sure you follow these procedures. This was just an overview and not inclusive. If you have any more information you would like from me, please contact me at the information below. Thanks for listening.